Welcome to VSOW.
It is a pleasure to be here.
Today we are going to attempt something that feels a little bit dangerous. We're going to take a sledgehammer to one of the most bedrock assumptions in business, in education, and honestly, in how we structure our entire society.
That's a big one.
It is. We're investigating the hidden mechanics of human behavior, specifically why we do what we do.
We're looking at the machinery of incentives, and you're right to call it a bedrock assumption. I mean, it's pretty much the operating system for most of the modern world.
It really is. If you stop the average person on the street, or even, a high-level manager, and you ask them, how do you get someone to do something? The answer is almost always the same.
The carrot and the stick.
The carrot and the stick. It's so linear. If you want more of a behavior, you want higher sales, better grades, faster running, you reward it. You give a bonus, a gold star, a commission.
And on the other side of that coin, if you want less of a behavior, if you want to reduce risk or stop carelessness, you make sure the person pays for it. You introduce a cost, a penalty.
Exactly. It creates this very logical, almost mechanical view of the world. Input, incentive, output, behavior. But, and this is why we're here today, we have a stack of research that is just fascinating because it suggests this intuition isn't just slightly off.
It's often completely dangerously wrong.
Completely. We're looking at a 40-year meta-analysis on motivation and a really deep philosophical deconstruction of risk.
And when you put these sources together, it becomes incredibly clear that our systems for motivating employees and our systems for ensuring against disaster might be fundamentally misunderstood.
The narrative hook here is it's pure tension. We are taught from childhood that money talks, but what this source material suggests is that in many, many cases, money doesn't just fail to talk. It actually silences the natural drive we already have.
That's a great way to put it. It silences it.
So our mission today is to move beyond that carrot and stick simplicity. We need to understand the complex interplay between intrinsic drive, that fire inside you, and external rewards.
And then later, we'll see how this connects to a very tricky, very loaded economic concept called moral hazard.
So let's dive into the stack. I want to start with what psychologists call the war on rewards. Because for a very long time, the prevailing wisdom in psychology, think behaviorism, B.F. Skinner, was that rewards were always good.
Oh, absolutely. Reinforce the behavior you want and you get more of it. It was dogma.
It was.
Mm.
But in the 1970s, psychology hit a massive speed bump. Researchers stumbled upon a really counterintuitive discovery that eventually got labeled the overjustification effect.
Fantastic name for it, too.
It really is. The source material references the Wikipedia entry for a broad overview, but it really anchors this in some classic, almost cinematic experiments. Before we get to the experiments, though, let's define the mechanism. What exactly is the overjustification effect?
Well, the core definition is this. When you introduce an expected external incentive, so think money, a prize, a grade for a task that a person already finds interesting.
Okay, that's a key part of it. They have to like it already.
Crucial. When you do that, their intrinsic motivation to perform that task actually decreases.
Which, if we just pause and think about it for a second, makes absolutely no sense on paper.
Yeah.
If I love solving puzzles, and I do it for free in my spare time, and then you come along and offer to pay me to solve puzzles, I should be the happiest person on earth. My motivation should be intrinsic plus extrinsic. It should be double.
You would think the motivations would just stack on top of each other, but they don't. They seem to conflict. And it comes down to what psychologists call the locus of causality.
The locus of causality. Break that down.
It's basically the answer to the question, why am I doing this? When you're doing the puzzle for fun, the locus is internal. The why is, I'm doing this because I want to, because it's enjoyable.
Right. It's coming from me.
Exactly. But the moment money hits the table, the locus shifts. It becomes external. The why is no longer I want to, it's I am doing this because he is paying me.
The narrative completely changes in your head. It goes from play to labor.
That's it, exactly. It becomes a job. And once it becomes a job, you only do it when the boss is watching or the meter is running.
To see this in action, we really have to look at the classic experiment by Edward Deci from 1971. This is the study that really lit the fuse on this whole debate. I want to paint the picture of this because the methodology is just so clever in its simplicity.
It's a very elegant study design. Really beautiful.
So picture a university laboratory. Small room, a table, a chair, and of course a one-way mirror.
Always a one-way mirror.
Deci brings in subjects, college students, and sits them down. On the table is a Soma Cube puzzle. And for anyone who hasn't seen one, these are comprised of 7 little magnetic pieces that you have to assemble into a specific 3D shape.
And it's important to note, these puzzles are fun. In the pilot testing for the study, DeC specifically confirmed that students naturally enjoyed playing with them. It's like a physical version of Tetris or something. It's inherently engaging.
Right. So he splits the students into 2 groups, the control group and the experimental group. And the experiment runs over 3 separate days for everyone.
3 sessions.
On day 1, both groups just come in and solve puzzles. No money is mentioned at all. They're just establishing a baseline of how much these students like playing with the puzzle on their own.
Everyone is happy. Everyone is just playing.
Now comes day 2. The control group comes back, and for them, nothing changes. They just solve puzzles again. But the experimental group gets a new instruction. Tacey tells them, for every puzzle configuration you solve correctly within the time limit, you will receive $1.
Which, if you adjust for inflation, is a decent amount of lunch money for a student back in 1971. It's not trivial.
Not at all. So on day 2, the experimental group is working hard. They're incentivized. But here is the genius of the study. In the middle of every session, day 1, 2, and 3, the researcher stands up and says something like, "Excuse me, I need to leave the room to print out a questionnaire. I'll be gone for about 8 minutes. You can do whatever you want while I'm gone."
Do whatever you want. That is the trap. That's the whole experiment right there.
He leaves the room.
Mm.
But of course, he's watching them through that one-way mirror. And he's holding a stopwatch. He isn't measuring how fast they solve the puzzles when he's in the room. He's measuring what they do when they think no one is looking.
This is the free choice period. And it is the gold standard for measuring intrinsic motivation. If you keep playing with the puzzle when the boss is gone and the pay meter isn't running, you truly, genuinely love the puzzle.
So what happened? What did the stopwatch show?
Well, on day 2, when the money was on the table, the experimental group worked efficiently when the researcher was there. But then came day 3. This is when Dusty dropped the hammer. He told the experimental group, "We have run out of grant money. I'm sorry, but I can't pay you today."
The incentive is removed.
Yeah.
Just pull right out from under them.
Right. And then he does the same thing. He leaves the room for the 8-minute free choice period. And what he saw was stark. The control group, the ones who never saw a dime, they kept playing with the puzzles during their break, just like they did on day 1. Their interest was stable. But the experimental group, the moment the researcher left the room on that 3rd day, they stopped.
They just quit. Cold turkey.
They read magazines that were left on the table. They looked around the room. They stared into space. They did anything but touch the puzzle. The data showed their voluntary engagement, their interest, had dropped significantly below their own baseline from day 1.
So the introduction of money on day 2 didn't just boost their performance temporarily. It effectively broke the machine. It stripped the fun out of the task.
Yeah.
So when the money vanished, the motivation vanished right along with it.
Precisely. The money crowded out the joy. It reframed the entire activity. It turned a game into a transaction. And nobody works for free once they know their labor has a specific price tag.
That is just profound. And it's not just, cynical college students. There's another study in the stack, this one by Lepper, Green, and Nisbet from 1973, that is perhaps even more heartbreaking because it involves preschoolers.
Yes, the famous magic marker study. This one is cited all the time in education reform debates, and for good reason.
The setup was similar in principle. The researchers went into a preschool and they just observed. They identified the kids who already spent their free time drawing with magic markers. These are the little artists of the class. They loved it.
So they had a very high baseline of intrinsic motivation.
Exactly. The researchers then divided these kids into a few different groups. One group was the expected reward group. They were told, very specifically, if you draw a picture for me, you'll get this good player award. And they showed them a fancy certificate with a gold seal and a big blue ribbon.
And for a preschooler, that ribbon is a serious status symbol. That's like the Nobel Prize.
Of course. So the kids drew the pictures, they got the ribbons, everyone was happy, it seemed to work. But then, a few weeks later, the researchers came back to the classroom, undercover, for a secret observation period during free play.
And this is where the undermining effect shows up in the data.
It's brutal. The kids who had been bribed with the gold ribbon, the ones who drew for the award, were now significantly less likely to pick up the magic markers on their own than the kids in the other groups who had never been rewarded.
They stopped drawing.
They took something the child loved, art, and they turned it into something the child did to get a certificate.
And once the certificates weren't being handed out anymore, the art stopped. The implication for education here is just massive. I mean, think about how we run schools. Pizza parties for reading books, gold stars for homework. We think we're encouraging learning.
But Lepper's research suggests we might actually be destroying the natural love of learning. We're teaching them that the point of reading isn't the story, it's the pepperoni.
Exactly. We're systematically changing the why from an internal one to an external one.
Okay, so up until this point in our deep dive, the message seems crystal clear. Rewards are bad. They're poison. They kill creativity. They kill passion. And for about 30 years, this was the dogma in a lot of psychological and educational circles. But the stack doesn't end there.
It does not. That would be too simple. Science is a conversation, not a monologue.
And we have a rebuttal, a fierce one. We have a paper here titled, Pervasive Negative Effects of Rewards on Intrinsic Motivation. The Myth Continues, by Cameron, Banco, and Pierce.
And just from the title alone, you can tell they are not here to make friends.
No, they're pushing back, and they're pushing back hard. They argue that this whole rewards are harmful narrative became a kind of myth, a generalized overstatement that ignores reality.
They conducted a huge meta-analysis looking at dozens and dozens of studies to challenge this idea, and they found that rewards are not universally negative. In fact, they argue that if you look at the details, the right kind of rewards can actually boost intrinsic motivation.
So it's not the reward itself, it's the implementation.
It depends entirely on how the reward is given. They break it down into contingency. You have to look at what the reward is actually tied to.
Okay, so let's unpack these categories, because this feels like the difference between a manager who accidentally destroys a team and one who builds it up.
It really is. First, you have task non-contingent rewards. This is basically a reward just for showing up. Here's $1 for participating in our study today.
Like a participation trophy.
Yeah.
Or maybe a base salary, technically.
In a way, yes. And they found this has basically zero effect on intrinsic motivation. It doesn't help, it doesn't hurt, it's just neutral background noise.
Okay, that makes sense. What's next?
Then you have task contingent rewards. This is what Dacey did in his experiment. Finish this puzzle, you get $1. Draw this picture, you get a ribbon. You get paid for doing the task, for completion, regardless of how well you actually do it.
And this is the bad one, the one that causes the over-justification effect.
Yes. The meta-analysis confirms that these task-contingent rewards for mere completion do generally have a negative effect. They feel controlling. They feel like a bribe. They're the ones that shift that locus of causality.
But then there's a third category, and this is where it gets interesting.
This is the critical distinction. It's performance-contingent rewards. This is a reward given for doing well, for surpassing a certain score, for beating a personal best, or for exceeding a standard of excellence.
So it's not just, did you do it? It's, how well did you do it?
Exactly. And what happens when the reward is tied to performance?
I'm guessing the effect changes.
The effect completely flips. It becomes positive. Intrinsic motivation actually goes up.
Wait, hold on. So if I tell you, if you absolutely crush this project and deliver an amazing result, you get a bonus, that doesn't kill your love for the project.
According to Cameron and Pierce's meta-analysis, no, it enhances it. And the reason comes back to a very fundamental part of human psychology. We love to feel competent.
Competence, okay.
When you get a reward for doing well, that reward isn't just money or a ribbon, it's information. It's a signal. It's the world telling you, hey, you are good at this. And that feeling of competence, of mastery, is a huge driver of intrinsic motivation. It validates your skill and makes you want to do it more.
That makes a lot of sense. If I win a gold medal in a race, I don't suddenly stop running because, well, I already got the medal. I feel like a champion, so I want to run more.
Exactly. The reward acts as a scoreboard, not a bribe. It's feedback.
There's one more really important nuance in the Cameron and Pierce paper that I think is essential for anyone dealing with the real world. Tasks like taking out the trash or doing data entry.
Yes, the boring task nuance. This is key.
We've been talking about how rewards can kill interest in things you already like to do. But what if I hate the task? What if I have zero intrinsic motivation to begin with?
Then you have nothing to lose. You can't kill a motivation that doesn't exist. For low-interest, boring, mundane tasks, the over-justification effect doesn't apply because there's no initial justification to undermine.
So in those cases, the carrot works just fine.
It works perfectly. If you want someone to scrub the floors or enter thousands of lines of data into a spreadsheet, rewards are not only effective, they're often essential. They provide an external reason to do something that has no internal reason.
Okay, so we've got a bit of a conflict here. We have the Deci and Lepper camp saying, essentially, rewards are poison for interest. Then we have the Cameron and Pierce camp saying, no, rewards are information about competence. and they're great for boring tasks.
A classic academic debate.
So how do we reconcile this? Because we have a third and final source in this part of the stack, a massive meta-analysis from the Psychological Bulletin by Sarasoli, Nicklin, and Ford, published in 2014.
And this paper is effectively the peace treaty. It looks at 40 years of research, hundreds of studies, to try and settle the fight once and for all.
And what's the verdict? Do intrinsic and extrinsic motivation fight each other to the death, or do they work together?
Well, the big finding, the headline, is that they are not enemies. They jointly predict performance. But, and this is the real aha moment for me in all of this, it depends entirely on what kind of performance you want.
Okay.
No.
You have to define your terms.
Uh-huh.
And they split it between, what was it, quantity versus quality.
Precisely. That's the whole ball game right there.
Let's break this down, because this seems incredibly practical.
Okay, so if your goal is quantity pure volume, how many boxes can you stack? How many envelopes can you stuff? How many widgets can you assemble on a line? If that is the goal, extrinsic incentives are king.
No question.
The best predictor of producing more stuff is paying people directly for it. Commission, piece rate pay, you name it. If I pay you per box, you will stack a mountain of boxes.
Right. But what about the other side?
If your goal is quality, if you need complex problem-solving, creativity, judgment, nuance, if you need a good strategy or a beautiful piece of art or an elegant piece of code.
The stuff that, robots can't do yet, the human stuff.
Right. For quality, the correlation with direct incentives drops significantly. The best predictor of better stuff is intrinsic motivation. You cannot bribe someone into being brilliant. You can only bribe them into being busy.
You can't bribe someone into being brilliant. That is a powerful, powerful distinction. So the ZC puzzles,
Yeah.
that was a quality and engagement issue. The boring tasks like data entry, that was a quantity issue.
Exactly. And Sarasoli's paper goes one step deeper into the mechanism of crowding out. He introduces this idea of salience.
Salience, that basically means how obvious is the money.
Right. How much is it occupying your mental bandwidth at that moment? If an incentive is directly salient, meaning the money is right there hanging over your head, tied to this specific hour of work, the specific task, it crowds out the intrinsic drive. Your brain focuses on the cash, not the craft.
It just consumes all your attention. It becomes the only reason you're there.
But here's the problem. We all need to get paid. Artists need to eat. Engineers need to pay rent. You can't just run a company on good vibes and intrinsic motivation.
So how do you pay creative, high-quality output people without crowding out their creativity?
You use indirectly salient incentives.
Mm-hmm.
This is things like a strong, fair-based salary, good benefits, a general yearly bonus that isn't tied to every single keystroke you make.
So they're in the background. They're not front and center every minute of the day.
Yes. And the research is very clear on this. These indirect incentives do not crowd out intrinsic motivation. In fact, the opposite happens. When people feel secure and fairly paid via these indirect incentives, the link between their internal drive and their high-quality performance actually gets stronger.
So the practical takeaway here is surprisingly specific. If you want a robot, someone, to just churn out volume dangle a dollar bill directly in front of their face, but if you want a human, someone to think and create and solve problems, pay them well enough to take the money issue completely off the table and then get out of their way.
Take the money off the table so they can focus on the work. That is the synthesis of 40 years of research.
I love that.
Yeah.
Now, I want to use that idea, the whole idea of engineering behavior, to bridge to the second half of our deep dive. We've talked about how we use incentives to get people to act. Now I want to talk about how we use them to get people to be safe.
Okay. We're shifting from the psychology of rewards to the economics of risk.
But the underlying logic is so parallel. In the reward world, we worry that money creates fake motivation. In the insurance world, the big worry is that safety nets create fake security, or rather, a dangerous sense of it.
This brings us to the concept of moral hazard.
A term that gets thrown around constantly in politics and economics, and usually, as you said, with a lot of judgment attached to it.
A whole lot of judgment.
So let's define it first. Based on the sources, specifically the paper by the philosopher and Hale and the Reddit thread discussion, what is moral hazard in its driest, most economic sense?
In the textbook definition, moral hazard is the tendency of an insured party to assume risks they wouldn't otherwise assume, simply because they know they're protected from the consequences.
The classic example is always building a house in a floodplain.
It's the perfect example. Imagine you're looking for a place to build a house. You find this beautiful spot right on the riverbank, but you know it floods every 10 years. If there is no insurance, you look at that risk and you say, absolutely not, I'll lose everything. So you build on the hill instead.
You are naturally cautious because you bear the full catastrophic cost of your mistake.
Exactly. But now imagine the government, say FEMA or a private insurer comes along and says, don't worry, if your house floods, we will pay to rebuild it. Suddenly, the entire calculus changes. The riverfront property looks a lot more appealing. You might decide to build that river house after all.
Because I'm insulated from the worst of the risk. The cost of the disaster isn't falling entirely on me anymore. It's falling on the broader insurance pool.
And that behavior change, taking a risk you would not have taken otherwise, is the hazard. Critics argue that this creates bad incentives. It promotes laziness. It promotes recklessness. It encourages bad decisions.
And this is where the moral part of the name comes in, which is so loaded. It implies that there's something fundamentally immoral or deceitful about the person taking that risk. It sounds like an accusation. You are cheating the system. You are being irresponsible with other people's money.
It's extremely judgmental. And the source material points out that this argument is often weaponized, particularly by the economically powerful, to argue against social protections. You hear it all the time. We can't have generous unemployment benefits because of the moral hazard. People will become lazy and won't look for work.
But Benjamin Hale, in his paper, What's So Moral About the Moral Hazard, decides to really take this apart philosophically. He asks a really provocative question. Is it really cheating? Is it really stealing? Or is that just a story we tell to justify a certain worldview?
Hale's analysis is fascinating because he just strips away all the economic jargon and looks at the pure ethics of the situation. Let's take the cheating argument first. Is using insurance to take a risk actually cheating?
My first gut reaction is, maybe.
Yeah.
You're kind of altering the rules of the game in your favor.
But Hale says no. Insurance is a contract. It's a business deal. If I buy car insurance and I then choose to drive on the highway, which is statistically much, much riskier than leaving my car in my driveway, I am not cheating the insurance company.
You're using the product you paid for.
I am using the product exactly as it was intended. As long as I don't commit fraud, like burning my own car on purpose to collect the money, I am following the rules of the contract to the letter.
The insurance company knows you're going to drive.
Yeah.
They price that risk directly into the premium they charged you.
Of course they did. Okay, so it's not cheating. But what about stealing? This is the one that gets people really fired up. If I take a risk and I crash and the big insurance pool has to pay for it, aren't I essentially stealing money from all the careful people in that pool who didn't crash?
This brings us to the berry farm analogy, which I think is the absolute highlight of Hale's paper. It clarifies this whole mess beautifully.
I love this analogy.
Me too. Lay it out for us.
Okay, so imagine there are 10 farmers. They all grow strawberries. Strawberries are a safe, steady, reliable crop. But farming is unpredictable. Lightning strikes, floods happen, pests arrive. So these 10 farmers decide to pool their resources. They form a co-op. The deal is, if one farm has a catastrophic failure, the other 9 will chip in to keep that farmer and their family from starving.
That's the essence of insurance right there. Risk pooling.
Yeah.
Spreading the risk across the community.
Right. Now imagine one of these farmers, let's call him Farmer Steve, looks at the safety net and gets an idea. He thinks, since I have this backup, since I know I won't starve if this fails, I'm going to try planting a new experimental crop, let's say, high-yield blueberries.
But the blueberries are fragile. They're a much bigger risk than the sturdy old strawberries.
They're very risky. Steve is knowingly increasing his risk profile significantly. Now, a traditional critic of moral hazard would point at Farmer Steve and scream, look, he's being reckless. He's taking advantage of the system. If his blueberry crop fails, he is stealing from the rest of us.
He's free-riding on their safety and their careful strawberry planting.
That's the accusation. But Hale completely flips this on its head. He says, wait a minute. Why does insurance exist in the first place? Does it exist just to keep us all perfectly safe in our beds, never changing anything? Or does it exist to enable us to do things we couldn't otherwise do?
Because if Steve's risky blueberries succeed.
Exactly. If they succeed, he might discover a new farming technique. He might yield a massive surplus that benefits the entire co-op. He innovates. The insurance didn't make him lazy. It made him brave.
So the safety net allows him to innovate. Without it, he'd be stuck planting strawberries forever.
This is Hale's central insight. Insurance isn't just about safety, it's about enabling productive action. It exists specifically to allow people and societies to take risks they wouldn't otherwise be able to take.
That is a powerful reframe. I mean, if I didn't have car insurance, I might never drive my car. I'd be too terrified of the liability of a fender bender with a Mercedes. But society wants me to drive. We want people to be able to get to work, to participate in the economy.
Precisely. If insurance didn't change your behavior, if it didn't make you more willing to engage in a risky activity like driving, it would be socially useless. We want the surgeon to attempt the risky life-saving surgery. We want the entrepreneur to start the new company, even though most new companies fail.
So the moral hazard, the fact that the safety net makes us a little bit riskier, isn't a bug in the system. In many ways, it's the main feature.
It's the whole point. Hale argues that calling it a moral hazard is a dangerous misnomer. He concedes it might be an efficiency problem for economists to solve. It might be a pricing problem for actuaries. But calling it moral loads it with this heavy, unearned accusation that the person taking the risk is a bad person.
When really, they're just a rational person responding to the incentives of the safety net in exactly the way the safety net was designed for. Farmer Steve isn't a villain. He's an innovator using the tools available to him.
Right. And the Reddit source that's included here reinforces this really well. It mentions that in political debates, the moral hazard argument is often just a way to shift blame. It focuses on the character of the insured, oh, they built in a floodplain, they're foolish, rather than on the systemic value of having flood insurance in the first place.
It's really interesting how this connects right back to the first half of our show. In both cases, rewards and insurance, we're looking at these very deliberate attempts to engineer human behavior.
We are, and in both cases, the simple, cynical, mechanistic model completely fails us.
With rewards, the cynical model is everyone has a price, just find it and pay them. But we learned from Deci and Lepper that paying them can actually kill their internal drive if you do it wrong. You can crowd out the very thing you want to cultivate.
And with insurance, the cynical model is if you protect people from consequences, they will become reckless, lazy monsters. But we learned from Hale that protecting people is actually what allows them to be innovative and productive and brave.
It seems like the common thread here is that economists and managers, they worry way too much about what they call hidden action.
That's the technical term, yes, the principal agent problem. Economists worry about what they can't see. They can't see exactly how hard the employee is trying in their cubicle, so they try to bribe them with piece rate pay. They can't see exactly how carefully the insured person is driving, so they worry constantly about moral hazard.
But what these sources suggest is that maybe we should worry less about controlling all those tiny micro behaviors and more about the big picture.
Right. Instead of focusing on control, we should be focusing on purpose. With rewards, the purpose is key. Are we looking for quality or quantity? That question determines the entire incentive structure. With insurance, it's the same. Are we looking for absolute safety, or are we trying to enable innovation? That determines how much risk we should be willing to tolerate.
It's about matching the tool to the goal. You don't use a hammer to tighten a screw, and you don't use a commission structure to inspire a masterpiece.
And you have to realize that humans are not simple input-output machines. You can't just insert a coin and get a predictable behavior. The context, the feeling of competence, the feeling of safety, the purpose of the task, it all matters so much more than the specific dollar amount.
So bringing this all together for a final thought, we started with this idea that our basic intuition is wrong. We learned that money isn't the ultimate motivator. In fact, it can be a powerful demotivator for things we already love.
Unless it's a boring task, or unless that money is delivered as a signal of competence, the nuance, as always, is everything.
And on the other side, we learned that safety nets don't just create laziness and dependency. They create the psychological confidence to take necessary productive risks.
Hale's final provocation in the text is something I think is really worth sitting with. He doesn't just say the term is wrong. He calls moral hazard a morality shield.
A morality shield. What does he mean by that?
He argues that by labeling these complex economic problems as moral hazards, policymakers and insurance companies get to hide behind a shield of righteousness. It allows them to avoid having the much harder, more important conversation about the actual value of the risks being taken. Instead of asking, is this risky activity socially worth it? They just get to judge the character of the person doing it.
We should stop judging the character of the insured and start evaluating the value of the activity. That is a huge fundamental shift in perspective.
It is. It asks us to look at the potential upside, not just the potential cost.
And the Sarasoli study on motivation leaves us with what it calls an uncomfortable conclusion, too. You can't just have a simple rule like incentives are good or incentives are bad.
No, you're forced to ask the hard question, what am I trying to achieve here? Do you want a robot to stack boxes? Fine, use direct incentives. Do you want a human to solve a complex crisis? You have to foster their intrinsic motivation, supported by a fair background salary. It's not one size fits all.
So as you, our listener, go about your week, whether you're managing a team, raising kids, or just trying to motivate yourself to get to the gym, maybe think about that distinction.
Ask yourself, what kind of behavior am I actually trying to produce here? And is the incentive I'm using, the gold star, the bonus, the punishment, is it accidentally crowding out the very thing I actually want?
And on the flip side of that,
Yeah.
where in your life are you playing it too safe because you don't have a safety net? And where could a little bit of moral hazard, a little bit of insulation from the worst case scenario actually help you take a leap that you really need to take?
That is the question worth answering.
If you enjoyed this deep dive into the messy mechanics of motivation and risk, please make sure to subscribe, like, and leave a comment on whatever platform you're using. It really does help us keep the lights on and the deep dives coming.
And it creates a very nice performance contingent extrinsic reward for us, too. Information about competence.
It does indeed. But we do it for the intrinsic joy, mostly.
Mostly.
Thank you for listening to VSOW.